There are moments in life when distance feels like an ending, when communication fades, when paths separate, when everything that once felt certain becomes quiet and uncertain. And in that space, it's easy to believe that what you had is gone, that time apart means disconnection, that silence has erased something meaningful. But when two people are truly meant to find each other again, distance doesn't destroy the bond, it reveals it. Because when everything is taken away, the constant conversations, the daily presence, the pravichnaya connection, you're left with something deeper than routine. You're left with truth. Without distractions, without effort holding things together, you begin to see the connection for what it really was. Not what you hoped it could be, not what you tried to make it into, but what it actually meant beneath the surface. Distance creates clarity in a way that closeness sometimes cannot. Emotions can get mixed with habits. You talk because you're used to talking. You stay connected because it's familiar. But when that disappears, you're no longer operating on habit. You're operating on feeling. And that's where the difference becomes clear. You start to reflect not out of confusion, but out of awareness. You think about what that person truly meant to you beyond the routine. You remember the connection without needing it to be constantly present. And if it was real, if it was something deeper than convenience or timing, it doesn't just fade away. It stays with you, quietly, consistently, even when you try to move forward. At the same time, distance shows you what wasn't working. It gives you the perspective you didn't have when you were inside the connection. You begin to understand the mistakes, the timing, the imbalance, the reasons why things didn't align before. And that understanding is important because it prepares you for something different if the paths cross again. Because when two people are meant to reconnect, they don't come back as the same versions of themselves who once separated. They come back with awareness. They come back with clarity about what went wrong and what needs to be different. And that clarity is only possible because of the distance that once felt like loss. Distance doesn't weaken a true connection. It tests it. It strips away everything unnecessary and leaves only what is real. And if what remains still holds weight, still holds meaning, still finds its way back into your thoughts without force, then you begin to understand that some connections aren't meant to disappear. They're meant to pause, to grow, and to return in a stronger, clearer form. So don't fear the distance, because sometimes it's not separating you. It's showing you what's real. When two people are meant to find each other again, the time apart is never wasted. It's necessary. What feels like separation is often a period of preparation, even if you don't recognize it at the time. Because when a connection doesn't work the first time, it's rarely because the feeling wasn't there. More often, it's because something within each person wasn't fully developed yet. There were lessons not learned, patterns not broken, perspectives not yet understood. And distance creates the space for that growth to happen. When you're no longer in constant contact, your focus begins to shift inward. Instead of trying to maintain the connection, you start paying attention to yourself, your habits, your reactions, your emotional patterns. You begin to see where you may have overgiven, where you tolerated less than you deserved, where you acted out of fear instead of confidence. These realizations don't always come easily, but they come clearly when there's enough space to reflect. At the same time, the other person is likely going through their own process. Growth doesn't only happen on one side. They may begin to recognize their own mistakes, the inconsistency, the lack of effort, the way they showed up when it mattered most. And while you can't control their growth, time and distance have a way of forcing people to confront what they avoided when everything was still active. This is why separation is not just about being apart, it's about becoming different. Because if two people were to come back together without changing, without evolving, the same issues would repeat, the same patterns would play out. And eventually, the connection would fall apart again for the same reasons it did before. But when growth happens, everything shifts. You become more aware of your worth. You become less willing to settle for inconsistency. You learn how to communicate differently, how to set boundaries, how to stay grounded in your own value. You're no longer the same person who once accepted confusion or imbalance. You've moved beyond that. And if the other person has also grown, they return with a different energy as well. More intentional, more consistent, more aware of what they risk losing if they don't show up properly. That's when the connection has the potential to become something stronger, not because it's new, but because both people are new within it. This is why time apart is so important in connections that are meant to last. It's not a delay, it's a transformation. It allows both individuals to step out of who they were and become who they need to be in order for the connection to truly work. So don't see the separation as something that broke the bond. See it as the space where both of you became ready for something real. When two people are truly meant to find each other again, there's something about the connection that doesn't completely disappear, no matter how much time passes or how far apart you go. You may move on with your life, focus on your goals, meet new people, and create new experiences. But somewhere beneath all of that, there's a quiet presence that remains. It's not loud, it doesn't always demand your attention, but it never fully fades. At first, you might try to ignore it. You tell yourself that it's over, that it's in the past, that you've moved on. And in many ways you have. You grow, you change, you build a life that doesn't revolve around that connection anymore. But then in unexpected moments it returns. A memory, a feeling, a thought that comes without effort. Not because you're holding on, but because something about that connection left a deeper imprint than others ever did. This emotional pull is different from attachment. Attachment often comes from habit, from familiarity, from the comfort of what you're used to. But what you feel here is something more subtle and more persistent. It's not driven by need or dependency. It doesn't demand action. It simply exists, quietly reminding you that what you shared had a depth that wasn't ordinary. At the same time, this pull isn't always constant. There are periods where you don't think about them at all, where your focus is completely elsewhere. But the fact that it returns even after distance, even after time, even after attempts to let go says something. Because most connections fade when they're no longer nurtured. They dissolve naturally, becoming distant memories that no longer carry emotional weight. But when something continues to resurface without effort, it suggests that the connection was rooted in something deeper than timing or circumstance. It wasn't just about proximity or convenience. It was about something that resonated on a level that time alone couldn't erase. And while you may feel this pull, it doesn't mean you act on it immediately. It doesn't mean you disrupt your growth or go back to what once was. It simply becomes part of your awareness. You acknowledge it without letting it control you. Because the purpose of that feeling isn't to pull you backward. It's to show you that not all connections are temporary. At the same time, if this connection is truly mutual, it's likely that the other person feels something similar, even if neither of you speaks about it. Even if both of you continue on separate paths, that underlying awareness exists on both sides. Because when something is real, it doesn't rely on constant contact to exist. It holds its place quietly until the moment when everything aligns again. So trust that if the connection is meant to return, that pull won't disappear. It will simply wait until the time is right. When two people are meant to find each other again, it's not just about the connection still being there. It's about the timing finally making sense. Because sometimes the reason things didn't work before has nothing to do with how strong the feelings were. It has everything to do with where each person was in their life, in their mindset, in their emotional readiness. You can have something real with someone and still not be ready to hold on to it the right way. Timing is something people often underestimate. They focus on the connection, the chemistry, the emotions, and assume that if those things are strong enough, everything else will fall into place. But the truth is, even the strongest connection can fall apart if the timing is off. If one person isn't ready to commit, if the other hasn't learned certain lessons yet, if both are still growing in ways they don't fully understand, then no matter how much they feel, it won't align in a healthy, lasting way. That's why separation sometimes becomes necessary. Not because the connection was wrong, but because the timing was. You needed time to become more aware, more grounded, more aligned with what you truly want. You needed experiences that shaped your perspective, challenges that strengthened your character, moments that forced you to grow beyond who you were when the connection first existed. And the same is true for the other person. They needed their own path, their own lessons, their own time to understand what they couldn't see before, because growth doesn't happen in comfort. It happens in distance, in reflection, in the absence of what once felt familiar. So when two people cross paths again after time apart, something feels different, not just emotionally, but mentally. The way you see each other has changed. The way you understand the connection has evolved. You're no longer approaching it from the same place you once did. There's more clarity, more intention, more awareness of what matters and what doesn't. This is where alignment begins. Because now it's not just about feeling something, it's about being ready for it. Being ready to communicate better, to show up more consistently, to handle challenges in a healthier way. You're no longer relying on potential, you're working with reality. And when timing aligns, things don't feel forced. There's a natural flow, a sense of ease that wasn't there before. Not because everything is perfect, but because both people are now in a place where they can meet each other with the right mindset. That's the difference timing makes. It doesn't create the connection. It allows it to finally exist the way it was meant to. So trust that if it didn't work before, it wasn't necessarily the end. It may have just been the wrong time for something that needed to wait. When two people meet again after time, distance, and growth, the most noticeable thing isn't just that they've reconnected. It's that everything feels different. Not in a dramatic or overwhelming way, but in a calm, grounded, almost unfamiliar sense of clarity. Because when a connection returns after both people have evolved, it no longer carries the same confusion, the same intensity driven by uncertainty, or the same patterns that once made it fragile. Before, there may have been overthinking, questions about where things were going, doubts about effort, moments where you felt unsure of where you stood. Emotions may have been strong, but they weren't always stable. There may have been inconsistency, miscommunication, or a lack of understanding that made the connection feel unpredictable. But when you come back together after growth, those elements begin to fade. You notice that the way you communicate has changed. Conversations feel more intentional, more honest, more direct. There's less guessing, less trying to read between the lines, because both of you have learned the value of clarity. You're no longer speaking from a place of insecurity or fear. You're speaking from a place of understanding. At the same time, the energy between you feels more balanced. It's not one person giving more while the other takes less. It's not one person trying to hold everything together. There's a mutual effort, a shared responsibility for maintaining the connection. And that balance creates a sense of peace that wasn't there before. You also approach the connection with a different mindset. Instead of rushing, instead of trying to define everything immediately, you allow things to unfold naturally. There's patience, not because you're unsure, but because you understand that something real doesn't need to be forced. It builds steadily with consistency and intention. And perhaps most importantly, there's a deeper level of respect, not just for each other, but for what you both went through to get to this point. The time apart, the growth, the lessons, it all adds value to the reunion. You're no longer taking the connection for granted because you understand what it felt like to not have it. This doesn't mean everything is perfect. There may still be challenges, moments that test the connection. But the difference now is how those moments are handled. There's more maturity, more patience, more willingness to work through things instead of walking away or avoiding them. Because when a connection returns in the right way, it's not built on the same foundation as before. It's built on everything you've learned since then. So when it comes back and feels different, trust that difference. because that's what shows it has truly grown. When two people are truly meant to find each other again, the biggest difference isn't just that they reconnect, it's how they choose each other this time. Before, there may have been confusion, hesitation, or a sense of uncertainty about where things stood. Feelings may have existed, but they weren't always supported by clear actions or consistent effort. It may have felt like one person was chasing while the other was unsure, or like timing kept getting in the way of something that could have been real. But when the connection returns after growth and alignment, it no longer operates from that place. It becomes a choice, clear, intentional, and mutual. Choosing each other means there's no longer a question of where do we stand. It's understood through actions, not just words. Both people show up, not because they're afraid of losing each other, but because they genuinely want to build something together. There's no need to convince, no need to chase, no need to prove your worth. The connection exists because both individuals are actively participating in it. This is where everything shifts from uncertainty to clarity. You're not trying to hold on to something that feels unstable, not waiting for effort or hoping for consistency. Instead, you see it, you experience it. It becomes part of the way the connection naturally flows. At the same time, choosing each other requires responsibility. It means you don't just rely on the past or the idea that you found your way back. You actively maintain what you've rebuilt. You communicate when things feel off. You address issues instead of avoiding them. You put in the effort not because it's difficult, but because it matters. There's also a sense of calm in this kind of connection. Not the calm of indifference, but the calm of security. You don't feel the need to constantly question things or seek reassurance. You trust what's being built because it's consistent, because it's intentional, because it's being reinforced through actions over time. And perhaps the most important part is that neither of you is trying to recreate what once was. You're not going back, you're moving forward. The past becomes a lesson, not a pattern. The mistakes become awareness, not something repeated. You're building something new, even though the connection itself feels familiar. This is what makes it real. Not just the feeling of reconnecting, but the decision to do things differently. The willingness to show up fully, to invest equally, to choose each other not once, but continuously. Because in the end, finding each other again isn't what makes a connection strong. It's choosing each other every day with clarity and intention.